have a bit of a discussion about SQLite data types. Now, a database stores data, which we've talked about in previous videos, but we need to know how they what the breakdown is, the data types, the type of data that SQLite can save and record, but also how that maps back to Java code. So a lot of this we're going to see within code, but it's also good to get some basic information which makes it a little bit more understandable before we get to that code stage. So let's do that now. So firstly, one of the curious things and very unusual things about SQLite is that it can literally save any type of data in any field. Now, it's referred to as dynamic typing, and it's fairly unique to SQLite. There are not many other database packages, if any, that do this. Now, generally speaking, this would be a negative thing, not a good thing. The reason being that it opens up your code, for weird, hard to find errors. For example, probably you've found already through the course, if you enter, let's say you've got a string and you try and put a number in that string, Java will normally come up and flag an error, and in actual fact you won't be able to get the program to run until you fix that. Well, that's not the case here, so it's something just to keep in mind. But with that said, if we approach this from the right point of view, we can get around that and not have any issues. But with that said, I just wanted to make it clear that that's what SQLite does, but it's not really an issue in practice. So the basic types in SQLite: null, integer, real, text, and blob. That's it. That's the only types of data you can currently store in a SQLite database. So what we're going to do is find out more about each, other than the null field. We're not going to be talking about that because it's not something we need to know at this stage. First one, let's talk about the integer data type. This is a whole number with no decimal places. The equivalent is int in Java, although it can store different types of numbers, but that's the primary one that we've obviously looked at and used before in the course. So whenever you think of integer in a SQLite, int is the equivalent in Java. Real data type. Now, a floating point number is equivalent to a double or a float in Java, which we've used in the past, and essentially something that's got decimal places. It's not a whole number, unlike the integer data type. Text data type. This is text and characters. One good example of a good fit is a string in Java will equate. You'd want to use the text data type to store that in a SQLite database. Now, it's also used for dates, since there is no date type in SQLite, so we'll be talking about that later. Lastly, the blob data type. This data type is very useful for binary data, for example, an image. Now, something that can't be represented as text, which you could do in a text field or a number. You could use this. As I said, an image is a great example here of the use of a blob field. Now, in principle, it does work well, despite the weirdness which we've talked about with dynamic typing, where any column in an SQLite database can literally contain anything. If we approach this in a structured way and we only put the data we want in the right data type, in other words, we make sure that through Java that we're always equating an int, for example, to an integer data type in SQLite, a string to a text in SQLite, for example. This gives us very few problems, and in addition, dates can be used quite easily as well. Extremely powerful. SQLite, as I've mentioned before, is very powerful. It's capable of creating and storing absolutely huge amounts of data. It's also very stable and reliable, as well as fast, and takes up very little in the way of precious resources, which, putting all this together, of course, makes it the perfect database for Android app development. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview of SQLite data types. Coming up in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about the basic SQL commands that we're going to be using when we're creating databases and tables and manipulating data. So I'll see you in that next video.